Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Shake Sales. I'm your host, Maggie Blume, the sales evangelist at Mailshake. And today we have an awesome guest. We have Blake Hudson joining us to talk about managing and creating a community for SDR teams. So Blake started as an SDR in 2018 and is now already an SDR manager at Tapcart. So Blake, thanks so much for being here. Do you mind taking some time to introduce yourself?
Of course. Thank you for having me, Maggie. Been looking forward to this and excited for this conversation. So my name's Blake Hudson. I'm SDR Manager at Tapcart, as previously mentioned. My journey into tech sales was a bit of a circuitous one. I started out in politics, majored in political science, worked in politics, ran for state senate at one point in time. We can get into that. That's kind of a wild story. Yeah. But eventually, there were two things that were kind of driving my career at the time. Number one, I really wanted to help people find a clarity of identity, practice, and purpose. So who they were, what they were doing, and why. I got to work in higher ed and higher ed administration for a little bit and got to get a taste of that. The second thing, though, was I realized somewhere along the way I was selling. And maybe myself, maybe the institution when I was an admissions counselor, but I wasn't getting paid like a seller and I wasn't getting trained like a seller. And so I thought to myself, well, why don't I at least see if I can do this? And went to a tech sales boot camp at Victory Lab, got in as an SDR at a fintech startup in Chicago. And that was really interesting because I didn't have a background in fintech. So my mindset was, if I can sell this thing that I don't know anything about, then I can sell. And so it worked out. Did that for a few years and got the hang of it. Got the good, the bad, the ugly of tech sales, which I'm really grateful for in hindsight. Worked at a couple different boot camps after that because it was like that perfect blend of still being in sales, but also helping other people navigate their career journeys. And now as an SDR manager, it's really been everything I thought it was going to be and then some. I'll keep it simple for now. We can go deep later, but basically I get to go through the highs and lows with sellers. I get to help them feel a sense of confidence and purpose in their role as SDRs. A lot of times the SDR role gets kind of dismissed or forgotten, but I think we do a really good job at elevating the importance of it at Tapcart. And so very fulfilling, very rewarding, and we're doing all right. We're winning. So we've had back-to-back record months and just excited to see the team grow and continue to win.
Awesome. That's amazing. All the way back to your transition into where you are today. It's funny, Blake, I started out as an SDR and then I became an SDR recruiter, then went back to being an SDR AE and now sales evangelist. But when I was a sales recruiter, I would always look at people who have been in the political science realm, like who were looking for opportunities out there, and they made absolutely wonderful sellers. Like they would come on the team and absolutely kill it. And I feel like there's so many similarities that just like you used from your background in political science, bringing it over to sales. But I truly saw that there and I was like, this is a crowd that I'm going to go after. And they were excited about it too. I think I've never been in the political science realm of things, but just from their stories, it seemed like they were super excited to jump into sales and talk about something different too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first and foremost, no one's really cussing me out on the phones here in tech sales. There's a hang up or something like that. But you try calling people, trying to get them to register to vote or get out the vote in Chicago during the World Series while the Cubs are playing. That's a tough sell. Going knocking on doors on Saturday mornings in the snow and you're the candidate. It's like, vote for me. Because later on it's like SaaS is the easiest thing I've ever sold. So it hardened me. But I think the biggest takeaway from politics as it relates to sales was it allowed me to see that I can separate myself from the interaction, from the transaction. And it might sound weird because I was the literal candidate and I was selling, but in tech and software and just business in general, like there are moments where you're going to have an opportunity to take things personally and there's a choice there. You don't have to. And so one of the things that we do with, our reps, we talk about call reluctance a lot, and like you're calling them on purpose for a reason to better them. If they're rude, if they hang up, if they're not feeling it, that's on them. That's in their control. But don't feel like that's always a reflection of who you are as a seller and most importantly as a person. So yeah, it was good practice, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like that probably got your mental toughness way up, especially if you were the one campaigning for yourself. I mean, that's a lot of pressure on the line because it's more of a reason to take all of that personally, which still you could try to have some separation, but it's different than selling something in fintech or SaaS or anything like that, where at the end of the day, maybe they're saying no to your product. It doesn't mean that they're saying no to you. And we should be thinking about it that way. And it's awesome that you can motivate your team that way too. Yeah. But cool. So, one thing that I do before I get on any of these interviews with people is I completely stalk their LinkedIn profile. That's how I figured out you were from Chicago, just like me. So go Cubs or Sox or whatever you follow. But, okay, cool. Me too. I was scared when I said it.
No worries.
Go Cubs. I'm a Cubs fan too, but so yeah, one thing I saw from your posts and noticed that your team does is you have this mentality that you instill in your team of selling together. But how does a manager actually do that and create that environment when everyone has their own individual quotas and KPIs?
I think the first and most important question to ask is why. It almost gets taken for granted. And I'm going to be honest with you, that's kind of a bigger kick that I'm on of late with like my content creation and the sort of branding side of things. There's a lot of how to do in sales. You've got great experts and practitioners out there. I'm going to see one, I think tomorrow in Beck Holland, flip the script.
Oh, nice.
A lot of people talking about the hows. I don't think there's enough people talking about the whys behind sales. And in this particular instance, you think about, well, why build community, especially among XDR teams? Like, they're just making cold calls. They're doing their own thing. Number one, we're a startup. And we don't win and grow as a company unless we all win and grow as a company. If I have one rock star seller and the rest of them are struggling, this ain't Oracle, right? Like we're the SDR. So it's imperative that we succeed together. Next, right? When we succeed together, there are breadcrumbs of success that get left behind. We need that because we're still pioneering what winning looks like on this team and at this company. And so if we can buy in together and do this as a group, we're going to grow that much quicker. The next thing is that the SDR role can be isolating. It can be lonely, especially in a remote world. So when you bring people together, I think you give deeper meaning to the work. You help your reps understand and see the role as their craft and not just a job, not just a role, not just a title, but a craft that they're going to be mastering for the rest of their careers, whether they continue in a sales track and go AE or whether they go into something else. Like you're going to always be mastering that craft of creating enthusiasm, building engagement, asking thoughtful questions. Like those are just skills for life. And so those are the two things there. The last point we might get to this is establishing an identity. And so I talked to the team early on. Actually, I think it was my first interaction with them. And then subsequently, as we continued to add on, 5, 10, 15 reps, like rookies win championships too. That was the response I had when, it was positioned to me like, what makes this team successful? Why should we count on them to win? What can we expect from them? And it just dawned on me like rookies win championships too. And so we wear that identity with a badge of honor. We understand that we might be the newbies on the block, but like we take a beginner's mindset to the work that we do. And we understand that despite whatever the notions or presuppositions about our role might be, we can still be great sellers. We can still accomplish our goals and we can still win together. And so there's an identity that we buy in together. There's the commitment to craft and practice. So we know what we're doing. We're trying to get better at it. And then there's that larger purpose of like, how do we get this organization to a place where we all can grow and benefit from it? And then also individually, what are those individual goals and focuses and areas of improvement? And if we can support one another in that, now we're really succeeding. So that's where that comes from. And I think the why is the bigger question there with community and sales.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love how you put it too, especially for maybe a lot of people listening to this are working at startups. It is a totally different mentality than working at, yeah, like you said, like a bigger company where you just feel like, I mean, that in itself can sometimes feel isolating, but I know a lot of people want to join startups so they feel like they're part of, I mean, that's why I wanted to join a startup. Like I wanted to feel part of like this mission and something starting from the ground up. And I work at a bootstrap startup now. And all of those are really part of like what makes me me and what makes me want to have not only myself, but my company succeed too. So from what it sounds like and what's really important is not only like instilling, okay, for the SDR, what individually matters to them? What are their goals? What are their motivations there? And then how can you translate that back to, the overarching goal of our team, our company, and creating a community around it? Because yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all self-motivated. There's certain goals and actions like that, but if you can really connect it to that community, I think that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so far it's produced great results, but more importantly, it's produced, I think, a deep sense of belonging amongst the team, of fulfillment with the work that they're doing. I mean, and the other thing too is these are things I'm asking them about on a regular basis. Like, it's not like I just decided this is what we're gonna do, and I said it works, and I said it's great. Like, I check in with my team, and building trust and vulnerability with the team is an ongoing process. I learned in therapy a long time ago this concept of share, check, share. You share something, you check in, you see how that resonates, and that's how you build vulnerability. And so as I share with them, the good, the bad, like what's real, what's not, I find I get that same sort of reciprocal feedback. And just checking in with them on a regular basis. Like, are you fulfilled? Do you feel like you're supported by your teammates? Are you having opportunities to be supportive? Like, is this work that you still see purpose in? Is it mapping towards the goals that we talked about as early as your interview, not just your first one-on-one? And so far, so good.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you're having success with that. And I think it's great that you bring it back to their interview and their, that place of where they got hired to, because I think that's so important when managers don't bring it up enough is, hey, this is the reason why we hired you and this is the reason why you wanted to join our team too. Like, is that still all resonating together? So I think that's awesome that you can really tie that back in. And like you said, check, and that's something that you've learned from, therapy, which you can, obviously relate into being a leader on a sales team too. So talking about, like mentorship and I know you've talked about this before. I've seen you talk about it of everyone should have a mentor, peer, and mentee. And I think I'm not trying to, but I generalize sales managers here, but I've heard sales leaders be a little bit kind of like, I've got this figured out. I've been in the role, so I know what to do. And I always just think it's the funniest argument because, we should always be learning and getting better and learning from other people. But yeah, why should a sales leader have a mentor, peer, and mentee? Like, what's the benefit?
Well, if you want to clip something, if there's one thing to take from this conversation, please hear me clearly. I do not know everything as a sales manager. I do not have everything figured out as a sales manager. And truthfully, I think that's one of my greatest strengths, is the ability to recognize that. Because if you're not growing, you're dying. I mean, Tony Robbins has a quote where he says that, and it's like it's kind of out there and in your face, but it's the truth. Like, you have to allow yourself space to grow. I had a post a while back where I talked about, not knowing is the first step to growing. Right? Realizing your unconscious incompetence is a really important thing, especially as a manager, because, my success or failure doesn't end with me. It impacts my team, it impacts their families, it impacts, basically it has consequences that are far reaching and far greater than myself. And so I wouldn't be so proud or stubborn to think like I don't have anything to learn. I have a lot to learn. And going back to your point about that post of mentorship, especially as a leader, it's a really interesting spot because you've got people, quote unquote, beneath you on the org chart. I hesitate to use those terms of like beneath and above, like, or people working for me. I'm their teammate. Like
Yeah.
I think of myself just as much as an SDR as they do. Um, I did an undercover boss. It's not so undercover boss when I was doing it, but like enough to get my hands dirty and understand what some of their day to day and the nitty gritty was, like making cold calls, working through outreach, using the different tools, and that allows me to better coach, to provide more specific instruction. But specifically to your point, I think it's important that you have people in your life that you feel capable of pouring into. Maybe you're a step ahead of them in life
Yeah.
or in your career journey. And really, that's what expertise is. Expertise is relative. Justin Welsh taught me this. It was, I'm an expert in tying my shoes to a 5-year-old,
Yeah.
and it's like I have a lot to teach them and things like that. Funny story, Coach Wooden, I'm out here in LA, and the UCLA basketball coach, he used to start every practice every year with like teaching the guys how to tie their shoes and put their socks on. And this is a guy, like, they would win national championships and have like the best recruits in the country. And it just speaks to like mastering the basics and the fundamentals and also not getting too high on yourself. But
Yeah. No.
also, it's important to have peers that you can, mutually exchange resources and ideas with. And I have those in my life. I've got, folks like Morgan Ingram, Nikki Ivey, of course, Jed at Mailshake. Like, these are people that, I can bounce ideas off of, I can learn from. And every once in a while, I might say something that they find useful too. And then lastly, it's important to have people that you feel you can intentionally learn from, right? We can learn from a variety of people and sources in our lives, but with a mentor, it's important that you have intentionality with that. And so where is this person ahead of me? What do they have to teach me? Maybe it's chronologically speaking in their career, they're further along, or maybe it's just the result of their life. It looks a certain way, and I want to understand how I can build the bridge between where I am and where they are. And so long story short, you've got the 33%, where you're pouring into, 33% with a peer, and 33% where you're receiving from a mentor. It doesn't have to be strict with that number, but it's just kind of a concept that helps you put into practice that reality of learning and 360 learning in a way you're pouring into and being poured into.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, for the mentors side of things, it's like looking up to a person that, might be 2 steps ahead of you, that you want to be there someday, so that you can really model off of like, okay, they did this, this, and this when they were an SDR manager, and this is what they did to become the VP of sales at X company. And then on the peer level too, I think that's also important because we are in a remote environment, and whether it be a peer from, let's say, another SDR manager at your company or an SDR manager elsewhere, like Jed on our team, it's like you're not really getting like that day to day of seeing how another SDR manager runs their day. And you could always take tips or things like that. And I think sometimes it can be hard in remote environments, but it also can be easy because, we like to talk about some of our tactics and share value on LinkedIn. But I guess it's just like sifting through the right things. And, maybe that's even like pinning posts of people who are peers to you of like, what are they doing that I could learn from today? But I really like that because I think that's part that I think people skip the most when they're thinking about those things. Like, hey, I want to have a leader in front of me, but then I also have this group of mentees, like when you are a manager, that are looking up to you too.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. But cool. And, we talked about this a little bit before of like creating a community in a remote environment for SDRs. What are some ways that SDR managers could do that? And I know it's, a recent shift and people have been kind of sifting through it, but I don't think we have it all figured out. And yeah, like what are some things that have worked for you?
Before I answer that, I kind of want to answer it with a question. Maggie, when you think back to maybe one of the more difficult moments of your career or a moment in your career where you didn't feel a sense of community, right? The question being around community. What would you say was one or some of the common themes there? I have a word in mind, and I want to see if there's a correlation there between the word I have. I'm going to write it down so you know it's legit.
Okay. So just to, so I can answer this correctly, like when there has been hardships in my career, what were things leading up to it, or how did I cope with those hard times?
What was, I guess I could say, what was the like general theme there? Was it, for example, I didn't feel like I had someone in my corner, or maybe it was I didn't have a clarity into my goals, right? Or I didn't feel like people were moving in alignment with me, like we were kind of moving in opposite directions. But whatever the theme might be, like what were some of the elements of that season of a lack of community?
Yeah. So I feel like it was, I think one of them was not knowing my goals, like not knowing what was expected of me for sure. That's typically when I've felt the lowest of like, I'm putting these efforts in, but what is this actually connecting to, or what is this relating to on the company level? Because then it was hard to relate that back to my own goals. And then I'd say another thing too would be, yeah, just like I think sometimes it would be lack of help or lack of collaboration. So I know this can sometimes happen with startups of you don't always have like a clear mentor, if that makes sense. Like sometimes there are like positions you can get yourself into that are like, hey, you're the only person on the team doing this. I'm on this lonely island. So I'd say that would be the two things, like not having a clear goal and being kind of isolated.
The word I wrote down was support on a strategic email that I had like that. And I think we kind of got around it.
Yeah.
But that's the core there is when people feel a lack of support, they're going to lack not only community, but they're going to lack a deeper sense of purpose. And so, as I mentioned earlier, with the community, a first key part of that a lot of sales leaders miss is the identity portion. Like, who is your team? What are they even about? Like, what do they stand for? What binds us together? And so that Rookies Win Championships too thing, which it can be silly, it can be a little bit of a mantra, right? But like it establishes who we are and what we're about.
Yeah.
And so once you have that, then we can start to talk about and think through like, okay, now what's expected of us? What defines a championship? Is it 1 month? Is it 1 quarter? And, I've talked with my team, like for us to really be the sort of SDR team we want to be, we have to have sustained success. It's not enough to just win once. In fact, we have another mantra, you can pick up on a trend here. We have one called win twice. And really what that comes down to is doing the right things daily as a seller sets you up for success, not just today, but tomorrow as well. And so I try to get them to understand, like, we don't have to stress about the last day of the month because we took care of that 2 weeks ago. We don't have to stress about seasonality in November because we took care of that in October and September. And so the work that we're putting in today serves us today and tomorrow. The last thing I would say too then is with this community piece is where are you headed, right? And so it's not enough to just say who we are. It's not even enough to just say, here's what I'm expecting of you, but that why. Right. And so when a community, when you have those things present, you have community.
Yeah.
So in your instance, and in my examples too of where I lacked community, one of the common themes there was I lacked help, I lacked support, I didn't have clarity of goals and vision. And it was just kind of showing up.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, think about it. Like you can show up to an event, right? A concert or a sporting event. But community comes from identity, a shared identity. Community comes from a shared interest, right? We want our team to win, or we want to experience this musician to the fullest extent. Like, so what are those things that bind us together, A? And then how do we as leaders support those individuals in what they're doing?
Yeah.
As a sales manager, it can be very practical. Like, hey, let me ride shotgun on a call with you. Hey, let me dive in, like what's going on, where are we at in relation to quota, right? And how do we lean into weakness? How do we support the strengths? It could also be something intangible, like telling them to take a day off. I've had some of my most successful reps, and the best, most important piece of advice I could give them was to just take a day.
Yeah.
Like I'd be in a one-on-one with them and I'd be like, yeah, cool. No, that makes sense. Here's what I need from you. Stop working for the rest of the afternoon. What? It doesn't make any sense, Blake. No, I know it doesn't make any sense. You know what else doesn't make any sense is you burning yourself out.
Yeah.
And it's funny because those weeks, those months where I lean a little bit heavier on take time for yourself, take advantage of the unlimited PTO.
Yeah.
Those are some of the most productive days, weeks, months that they have. And the last thing I'll say on that piece, and I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here with
No, go for it.
You have to model that behavior for your team too. And so recently I took a mental health day. Man, it was just like no reason. I just needed one.
Yeah.
Right? And I can't advocate for my team to take advantage of these things and build that trust with them and say, hey, it's safe. Like, come to me, tell me what you need. I'm here to support you and advocate for you if I never do it myself. And so when you're supporting a team, establishing a core sense of identity, establishing some of the collective actions that you take, establishing a clear and compelling purpose for that organization, and then showing them what it looks like. Not just telling them, not just giving them the thing to do, but actually modeling that behavior as much as you can. Those things, you do that, and I think you're going to have a great community, whether it's sales or otherwise.
Wow. I absolutely love that. And I feel like I've asked that answer in different ways to people before, but you just all encompassing gave us like the big picture of all of it. Because so many people can try to identify community as all these different things or say like, this is what works for our team. But you just kind of nailed like any type of input that people try to make a community with. It all comes from those things that you mentioned, like identity, the actions that you take, and then that overall purpose of why you're all there. And I totally agree with you as far as like a manager or a leader, you can't just tell people like, hey, you know, you have unlimited PTO, like use it the way that you want. Because I've been on a team before where I've had unlimited PTO and the manager never took PTO. So did I feel comfortable taking PTO? Absolutely not. Yeah. And I hear it with other teams too. And that's why they always say it's the slippery slope with unlimited PTO. I think it comes from leadership down because it looks totally different at different organizations. And there's no like regulation of it. It all really just comes from the leader at that point. Because not everyone else is comfortable to do, even though the manager or leader might be telling them, but to actually do those things.
Yeah, 100%. And it's important, like just thinking about leaders above the manager too, continuing to lean in and support and empower their managers in that, right? Especially if they've got, you know, a team that is working and succeeding and thriving. It's like, how do you lean into those strengths? We talked about it earlier, like mitigating the weaknesses and supporting the strengths. We have to do that at all levels, right? Both internally with ourselves, leading ourselves, and externally leading others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why it can sometimes be so gratifying to be a manager, but also sometimes so tough where you think like, why don't I just be an individual contributor again? No, but it sounds like you're doing an awesome job, Blake. And I love the way that you went through that and talking about community as well. One of the last questions that I have for you is something I see you sign off with a lot. And then I was just curious about is you put it at the end of some of your LinkedIn posts, choose confidence today. So can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, if I'm being completely vulnerable with you, I think sometimes it's a reminder to myself. You know, I don't know exactly how deep of a persona I give off in terms of my ability to remain this like confident individual. But I definitely have my moments where I struggle with it. And what I try and remind myself and of others with that sign off is that it's a choice. It's not something that you have or don't. And it's not a choice that you make once. Confidence is a choice that you make on a daily basis. And one thing that I want to say, and I hope people really hear me when I say this, is that your confidence is not solely tied to your competence. If that were the case, no one would ever pioneer anything. How could they? They've never done it before. So there's a lot of different ways to build confidence. There's a lot of different ways to show and display confidence. But at the end of the day, I think just helping people understand that it is a conscious choice that you can make on a daily basis is a game changer, right? Now, how you go about exploring confidence practices, affirmations, or watching the tape, right? Like seeing where you won in your life, or going in and seeing like where people have praised or supported you, or hell, just asking. It seems weird to say, but like, how have I been a resource to you? You can ask like close friends. You ask your network, is there any way that I've supported you? Just curious, right? Because what that's going to do is it's going to elicit feedback. You might get nothing, and then you come to find, all right, that might have been a blow to my confidence, but it shows me that like I still have room to grow. I can confidently move forward and say like I want to make an impact in people's lives, one that's demonstrable, one that they can speak to. Or the opposite happens and you get a lot of support and you hear, hey, you've helped me with this, you've helped me with that. Oh, damn, I didn't even know those things. That you noticed that? So confidence is going to be a big part of soliciting feedback. It's going to be trying things and bouncing back. Confidence is not always equated with success.
Yeah.
You can confidently fail. I think of the example I had. I think I was playing basketball with a friend, and this friend is really good. Sometimes they just like, you can see it. They just struggle with like doubt, or it's like they've missed 2 or 3 shots in a row. And if there's one area where I do not lack confidence, it's on a basketball court, sometimes to my detriment. But I told him one day, it just kind of came to me. I'm running, I'm sweating. I'm like, you know what? I don't care what you do. I don't care what shot you take. Even if you fail, do it confidently. I want you to fail confidently. He laughed at that. But like, I think it changed him. I think it worked because not just that day, but like the rest of our time playing together, even till now, he continues to play with confidence. And it's like the confidence comes from like who you are. It's a choice you make. It's something that's inside of you. It's not a result. It's not an external thing happening. It's a choice that lives within you and you can make on a daily basis. So whatever you're doing, do it confidently, and the competence will catch up with time, but it doesn't have to. That's not what it's about.
Oof, you're so right. And I sometimes do things outside of my comfort zone to try that practice that you just mentioned, because I know I'm going to fail. Like, for example, last year I took a pottery class, and the class was all levels. So basically, like, I'm living in a smaller town now in West Virginia, and anyone can rejoin the class. So people who have been taking this class for 15 years, and they're really, really good. And I haven't done pottery in like 10 years, and I get to this class and I just know, like, I see the people around me and I'm like, my first pieces are not even going to look like something, relevant, but I knew it. And I knew I was there to just like have fun, do something with my hands, have like a relaxing time. And like, I was totally okay with it. I didn't walk in there thinking like, oh, I hope I don't fail, or I hope I don't look stupid. It's just like, I knew I already was going to look stupid. I knew that it wasn't going to turn out great. And I had so much fun doing it, even with the things that turned out horribly. And then eventually I did get better too, which again, doesn't have to do with the confidence, but it was just like fun overall. And I think some people get so nervous about that, especially as SDRs. We talk about those failures a lot, or, we not talk about failures, but like we run into objections a lot where it can feel scary, and it can feel like, that confidence can be taken away from you in like seconds of a phone call. But I think if we have that mindset of like, hey, I'm going to make calls today and the stats are against me of a yes. And like just being okay with that too.
The pottery example is a really fascinating one. So I took a pottery class in high school. And I was kind of a silly high school student. I had some maturing to do. But I remember taking that class, and I think there's something to be said to getting into character. Because I vividly remember thinking I was Patrick Swayze, looking at my door, singing Unchained Melody on repeat in my head. Like it was living Ghost, right? The movie Ghost, great. If I've just dated myself, that's great.
No.
Great 90s movie. And I just remember like that class being so fun because I wasn't worried about my art. I genuinely wasn't worried about whether I made a good piece of pottery or a bad piece of pottery. Like I was totally immersed in the character.
Yeah.
And I think that the same can be said about even this example, the more practical one of like cold calling, or when I was in politics as another example. Like part of the character was I knew I had to get through so many no's to get to a yes. And so when I told myself, like, I pick up the phone and fundraising, I'm like asking people to donate, like I expected 10, 15, 20 no's before a yes.
Yeah.
I never actually got 20 in a row, but like that mindset, that leaning into that character, it made all the difference for me. And so as a sales rep, if you go like, hey, I'm going to make 30 dials before I ever talk to a person, that expectation setting changes everything. If you don't mind, I want to share a quick little point about expectations and why that's so important in sales and in startups in particular. So long story short, I was in a season as a sales rep where I was kind of struggling, a little bit of a malaise, and the rest of the group was struggling too. And I remember, someone on a whim just asked me, hey, Blake, how things going? How you doing? And instead of giving the standard, like, I'm good, how you doing? I don't know what came over me, but I just started like typing in my Slack channel. Well, I mean, I got a new apartment, things are good with my girlfriend, this, that, and the other, new laptop. This job is better than my last job. And I just started like rattling off all these things. I don't even know if I ended up sending it. I think I sent it. I'm giving myself credit for sending it in Slack. But long story short, I remember going into work that next day and seeing the sales floor with a completely different perspective. And that perspective was expectation and entitlement. So the folks around me were in a place where they were like, we should be promoted, we should be treated better than this, these leads don't work. There was all these different things that were frustrating them.
Yeah.
And some of them rightfully so. But you have a choice of where you can put your attention. And I was trying to approach it from like, well, these leads are better than the ones that we're getting. This job is better than the one that was getting. I'm paid more. I have better resources. You know what? It ain't all so bad. And so what I found was if I could maintain my gratitude to be above my entitlement, above my expectation, that gap was my happiness.
Yeah.
And in the moment that my entitlement and my expectation crept up above my gratitude, that led me to frustration. And what I found was with entitlement, you lose twice because you are constantly dismayed and frustrated by what you don't have. And it's really hard to appreciate the things that are currently in your grasp. And with gratitude, you win twice because everything you have seemingly is enough. And anything extra is just that. It's extra. It's great. And so, bringing it back home, you had mentioned like this idea when you went into your pottery class or when we go into cold calls and, well, what's our expectation?
Yeah.
What do we feel entitled to? Because this is going to sound so strange, but I was like grateful for hangups because I knew I was one call closer to a yes.
Yeah.
I was grateful for the gatekeeper who seemingly gave me the runaround because that was one extra piece of information I had about that call. And that gratitude carried me through a difficult season in my career as a seller. And what I've now learned is that it can carry you through a lot of difficult seasons in life. So the gratitude gap, for lack of a better, term, like, it's just something that as a startup seller can really help you maintain a sense of like well-being and balance in this role.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's having those, like, if you have that set from the beginning and like you said, the gratitude of it, like the way that you view every single one of those situations, or the way that I view like no one, if I cold call someone, no one's ever heard of Mailshake before. I can either take a look at that as like something negative, or I can just have some fun with it and, maybe mention that in my cold call, like, hey, you're probably going to hear a crazy name of a company called Mailshake. And you probably never heard it before, and then talk about it from there. And it's like just looking at what side of the coin you want to and taking it from there and making sure, I would rather choose gratitude over it so I can actually enjoy my day to day too. Yeah. But awesome, Blake, you've given us such great information and even some motivation here where I'm feeling good. Like I need to pull back out I had a screenshot folder on my phone of like all my positive wins, like email screenshots, things on LinkedIn, things on Slack that I need to look back at just as far as like choosing confidence and the things we talked about before, because I remember that used to help me. So you've inspired me to do that today, but I'm sure you've inspired a lot of other people about building community, being an SDR manager, and, really having a strong why behind this. But thank you so, so much for talking with us today. And Blake, where can we find you before we finish up?
Right now I'm on LinkedIn. I was thinking about or contemplating whether to do this or not. But I want to hold myself accountable. So I don't know when this podcast is going to come out, sometime in 2023 probably. And I want to build something. I don't know whether it's going to be a course or a podcast or whatever it is, the entity. What I want it to be about is the concepts we've explored today, emotional intelligence and sales, and how we're not talking enough about the whys. Started a post about it today. We'll see how that trend goes. But this is an accountability to all the listeners out there. If you open this podcast up in February, March, whatever the case may be, at 2023, and you see that I haven't built something, you have my permission to get on me. So right now,
woohoo!
You can find me on LinkedIn, but hopefully by the time this podcast comes out, there's a couple other places where you can find some resources that I put out. But I just know that the community, the sales community at large, needs more of that conversation to be had, and I feel uniquely equipped to provide that. So where can you find me? Today, LinkedIn. Tomorrow, who knows, but you have my permission to hold me accountable.
Amazing. You heard it today, November 1st, 2022. Blake is going to be building something amazing and we'll hold you accountable. But thank you so much again, Blake, for being on here. Looking forward to what you're going to be creating in the future. And thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Shake Sales. We'll see you next time. Bye.